I see we are in good company, and I don't have to explain so much about the 7 principles, the 7 teachings, and so on. But even if you have studied Theosophy for a very long time, it is quite a discovery to see how exactly correlated those 7s are. Why this lecture? I have to talk slowly, and if I don't know an English word, I ask you to help me with that. Why this lecture? Because we wanted to introduce Gottfried de Purucker's work and his ideas and his task to make the works of H.P. Blavatsky better known in the world. And as we sit here now, we are one of the few inheritors of his works and his knowledge and his studies. And sometimes we forget that. So if we want to keep Gottfried de Purucker's ideas alive in the world, then we have to look at each other and say, we are the bunch that has to do that. And that is the reason for this lecture, to keep GDP alive in the future. That's the reason why we have our workshop later to talk about that with each other, to see it clearly. Blavatsky started her work in 1875, and she gave the 7-fold division of man and cosmos. She did that in her secret doctrine, and she did that in a very clear and simple way in her Key to Theosophy. And of course all the 14 volumes of her articles, but the books that are really good to discover the 7 principles of cosmos and man, you find the secret doctrine and the Key to Theosophy. And the moment she wrote that in books and in articles, she had tegenwerking, opposition in her own field, from the chela of her own master, Sabaro. He said, no, 7 is not the good way to divide cosmos and man. It must be 5. For Atman is not a principle, the highest. Atman, the divine, is not a human principle, and the physical body is not a human principle. And there was some tension and some irritation even, and they wrote articles about that, then one and then the other. It's very instructive to see that. But Blavatsky told in her own esoteric instructions and in later writings that of course the division of man is not 7-fold. She wrote in her latest publication we have, the commentaries on the secret doctrine, she wrote, Atman is not your Atman. Atman is a universal principle. Atman is the principle of every living being. So she admitted that. And of course, William Quan Judge says very clearly in his esoteric writings that the Sthula Sharira, the physical body, is not a principle of man. And when they knew that, she still gave the 7-fold division. And we have to ask ourselves why. Because her teacher, Master Moria, and all the other workers working with Master Moria, asked her to do that. And Sabaro was also a pupil, a chela of Master Moria, and we have to ask ourselves why he asked her to do that, because he knew he wouldn't from his Advaita Vedanta Buddhistic background. not Buddhistic, but Advaita Vedanta background. And that irritation between those two lines is, and I speak as a personal opinion, one of the first seeds of splitting up in more than one stem the branches of the Theosophical Society. Because when H.P. Blavatsky was attacked in India and they told all kind of lies of her, then the Indian Theosophists at that time didn't take too much effort and energy and commitment to defend her. They defended the organization, they defended Theosophy, but they did not defend her as the scapegoat of the society. And then she had to go to Europe and eventually to London to finish her work, to write The Secret Doctrine and to start her esoteric teachings to her small group of students committed not only to the study of Theosophy, but to inspiring others with the Theosophical teachings. And therefore, I recommend you to read those discussions. It gives a very good insight in why the 7 principles. I don't have to explain them. Everyone here knows the 7 principles. Yesterday my lecture would have been much harder, but now I can swap to the next stage. After Blavatsky died, in 1900, there entered Gottfried de Purucker the Theosophical stage. Not so prominent, but in 1900 he already was in the society. And 30 long years, Catherine Tingley trained him to do the work he did later on. And that training time, people most of the time overlook. It's not interesting for people. They like to know what Gottfried de Purucker did as a leader. But if you take the fundamentals of esoteric philosophy and you realize that he wrote that or he talked that out, it wasn't written, it was talked, if you realize that he did that when he wasn't a leader at all, when Catherine Tingley was the leader and teacher and coached him to do that. And every chapter in this book, you find that he says, my beloved teacher asked me to explain to you, or my teacher asked me to add some more information, or to tell you only till this boundary about some teachings. And then you realize that you don't hear so much Gottfried de Purucker, but you hear Catherine Tingley. And she uses his perfect way of expressing things, but she coached him spiritually at that time. And then things are seen differently. 4. He presented the 7-fold structure of everything perfectly in his exoteric books. His books made from radio programs, his books made from open lectures, how do you say that? Public lectures. And that is the line of esoteric tradition of questions we all ask and man and evolution. You heard it yesterday. That is his public line. But together with his public line, parallel, he has his private studied line. We don't know the English word for besloten. Is that private? Yes, what the students did when they had their studies where no one else came. Is that private? Is that the word? Private studies? I look at my helper and he doesn't answer. Yes. No, but you know, how would you call the study? Esoteric. Okay, we use the word esoteric. And we can use it here because you all know that that isn't such a difficult word. He had his esoteric line, and that started in 1924, and a few years later, when he gave the studies later published as the fundamentals. And in those studies, he gave, in fact, Catherine Tingley gave, the most important first seed of all the sevenfold teachings there are. And when he became a leader, then he only develops it. He doesn't start it. The start is in 1924. I give you some of, and I don't need to read it, you can see it, some of the things Blavatsky wrote to show that she really meant to use the sevenfold division. You see that especially in the fifth class we are now, you can call it root race, the root race where the inner structure, the inner Buddha, outwardly known as Gautama the Buddha, was the Buddha of that race. You see that there the sevenfold division is very important, and that's the reason why she followed that. And you have read it all? Then I like to show you another one. And that is very important. She doesn't only say that everything is sevenfold, but she gives the correlations. She says the logos, the point of consciousness, is sevenfold. She says that all the forms are sevenfold. That the jewels of wisdom, the many branches of the ancient wisdom religion, is sevenfold. The principles are sevenfold. The states of consciousness are sevenfold. And matter and force is sevenfold. So what I enumerated now is the whole esoteric tradition, Richard. Yes, all those parts are the chapters in the esoteric tradition. And if you know that, then you can correlate them. You can weave them together, and then you are able to talk with people who have never heard of Theosophy. The first thing you can tell them is so basic, so fundamental, and so inspiring if you do it well, that they are not drowned in tens of hundreds of pages of teachings. This is the way to reach mind and heart of beginners. And that's the reason why I give this lecture now, to give you a help, a support, to teach to others, to make new people using Theosophy. So, two of Blavatsky, and then this is what GDP said about Atman. And this is very important. Then you lift yourself above the yes or no quarrel from the beginning. I see reading eyes and I see understanding eyes. When everyone has read it, then you see that Atman, he explains, is not something, how do you say that? No, yes, it is not just one thing. When you think about Atman, you see more aspects. And what he tries to say to us, that the moment Atman radiates into something else, that part of Atman is in fact our Atman. But Atman is always universal. You see, Atman also has aspects. And then you see that both Saburo and Blavatsky were right. Only you have to look further. Is that a thing to understand, or is that a little bit difficult? Yes? Think it over. Yes? And then I give you a very good quotation of William Conjurge in Echoes 3. And when I say Echoes 3, I always look grateful to Dara. And what he shows us is that the physical body is and is not a part of our 7 principles. You see that William Conjurge doesn't ask us to go on an adventure in the astral light. He says that the moment you see the outer body as well as the inner life behind it, within it, then you have the right view. Yes? When the consciousness and power of sight have gone upon another plane without losing the power to see on this. Then you see the 2 aspects, and then you understand that the physical body isn't a principle as such in itself, but it's only an aspect of our linga sharira, of our astral instrument. And when you see that, then you think, oh, that's not for me, that's only for chelas and so on, you know that. But it is for us. When you study Theosophy, you understand more of yourselves. And when you gain in self-knowledge, you gain in knowledge of others. We call it human knowledge, but knowledge of man, I don't know the English word, but you understand me. And when you gain in that faculty of not seeing people otherwise, but of understanding the inner part of your fellow man, then you see their body and their consciousness side to a certain extent. And then you are a wise person, and then you see both. So please don't throw yourself in the astral light, but gain self-knowledge and wisdom to understand other people. That is what Judge meant with this. And then you have back again your 7 principles. So, and then the 7 jewels of wisdom. Gottfried de Purucker, even zien. Yes, here. In chapter 15 and 16, he explains the 7 jewels of wisdom. In all the chapters in the fundamentals of the esoteric philosophy before 15 and 16, he already explains them, but not enumerates them. And in chapter 15, he does that. And he says, where I have it? he gives them, and they are old friends for you. You already know that. But how many of you have put the jewels and the principles on one line? Not so many. And Henk, Beesmer and I spent a whole afternoon to see what ideas came from that. And no, I don't ask you how many of you did that already. That's your own choice. But it is very, very inspiring to see what Svabhava and Kama has to do with each other, and what prana and the hierarchical structure of the universe have as a correlating aspect. Yes, it's really inspiring to sit down for a day and try to find the correlations. He gave that in his fundamentals, and Catherine Tingley gave us that. And this is what he said about the 7 jewels of wisdom, the 7 teachings to learn to see what theosophy is. And you see that he presents it with the correlation of the 7 initiations. And then you think, I have the principles, I have the teachings to train myself to see what theosophy is, and then you also have the initiations. And I don't want to go into initiations much further, that's for later on, but then you have this. And all those terms, theopathy, theopneusty, theophany and epiphany, he explains in later chapters in the same book. He studied, he gave, though he taught, and he wrote when he even wasn't yet a teacher and a leader in the Theosophical Society. I give you a hint with this, and please take it on, and perhaps Sunday morning we can talk about the correlations you have found. Okay. After that, in chapter 18, he introduces something that you don't find so much. You don't find so much in other theosophical writers. You find it in its more primitive form in the writings of Blavatsky, but he develops a system, a symbol, to teach us what theosophy is, that we are very proud of and we use very much. I talked about it yesterday already. And how do you call it? We say the egg-shaped diagram. What is the English word for this? Yes, I... The oval-shaped diagram? Yes? That's too far. We don't want to go that far, but it's an egg-shaped diagram, and that it's correlated with the auric egg. Students find for themselves later. But this diagram is in fact the basis upon which we can build up our knowledge of the principles, our principles, but much more. And that much more I want to show you. What did GDP do? He introduced that line. And that's the most important thing of the whole diagram. You perhaps don't recognize that. He says, you as a human being are a line of consciousness. A line going from the heart of the universe, and luckily enough we don't know where that is, So it's an infinite line inward, and it's also an infinite line outwardly. And we are that line. Whatever people tell you what you are a line of consciousness. And the consciousness part of you is the real you. And if you recognize that, then GDP did his work well. And he did more. He introduced again something Blavatsky didn't benadrukken, emphasize so much. And that is the fact that we are not only principles, but we are aligned with transformation points called monads, points of consciousness transforming that line into a lower or a higher stage or level of cosmos. And those monads, if you really study them, you understand so much more of yourselves. And he gave us that, and in fact, perhaps I didn't look enough, but I couldn't find that so much in the workings of other theosophical writers, only the students of GDP. And if you look at this, then you see what you can recognize in yourself, that there is something in yourself as a learning man. There is something like an inner teacher or an inner Manasaputra, but that's already a more complicated word to explain to newcomers. But there is an inner teacher in us, and we can focus our consciousness on that. There is an inner Christ or Buddha in us, and every mystic talks about that. And there is an inner God in us. And when Gottfried de Purucker calls it Atman, Jivatman, Buddha-Atman, and so on, you can translate that into inner teacher, inner Buddha or Christ, or inner God. And at that moment, you are never anymore, you don't have to depend on outer gods and outer Buddhas and outer teachings. You can respect them, you can see their value, but you always know you have an inner God and an inner Christ and an inner teacher within yourself. And whatever is said to you, whatever teachings are given to you, you always have to reflect that within yourself if it is compatible or is accepted by your inner own points of inspiration. And he did more. And most of the time we take this whole diagram for granted, but it isn't. It is the key to explain things to others. What GDP did was not only giving that monad, but on each level of the monad, he gave an ego and a soul. And what is the difference? And it's even difficult for we as we study to explain that so well. On every level, on the level of the inner galaxy, of the inner sun, of the inner earth, and of our own planet, on any level, any monad has the sum total of faculties, or wat zijn properties, eigenschappen? Properties, already evolved, already awakened, of all the infinite faculties and properties of the cosmos. And that sum total is our ego. Therefore, we are human monads because our ego is already active in the thinking faculty. And we are not animals anymore. And he put all the egos at the right side and all the instruments he put on the left side. And that is really unique. And it is so unique that Boris Tsirkov, when he published his collected writings of Blavatsky, put in those teachings of GDP to explain so much what HPB told. And it's very modest in the collected writings, but it is there. Only because it's the only good explanation of what she so purposely, chaotically told us. Because she was really chaotic in her presentation, but that was on purpose. What is the next one? I think that we have to go now to the toepassen, the put into practice of the teachings, the 7 jewels we learned. And then we come in good company with GDP's 12 series of 12 booklets, and especially the first one. We all know, and let's say, that every leader, every teacher of the Theosophical Society had an inner support of one of the chelas of the Lodge of Compassion. And Blavatsky had that. And she says in her Voice of the Silence, from HPB to H.P. Blavatsky with no kind regards. And that was a joke to show that behind the Blavatsky we know and could meet, there was a force active to give out all those teachings. It wasn't the Russian woman that taught us, it was that force, that HPB. The same with William Quan Judge. And in the United Lodge of Theosophy, there's a wonderful large book, the Letters That Have Helped Me. Yes, Letters That Have Helped Me, with also the articles about In a Borrowed Body, where he explained the Raja force behind the simple man, William Quan Judge, and the same with GDP. He was helped and supported innerly by a high Tibetan Chela, and that is the reason why we meet so much Buddhic, compassionate influence in his work, and especially Volume 1. I'm so glad you can read it again. There you find so much of the real meaning of Mahayana compassionate Buddhism. And he gave that because it was so important for the survival and the inspirational force of Theosophy. So we are not Tibetan Buddhists, but he took from all the world religions the esoteric background in Tibetan Buddhism to explain us what we can do to practice the Theosophical teachings. And he gave the Paramitas, or glorious virtues. They are explained in Buddhism, but they are not exclusively Buddhist. They are universal. In all religions you find them, but not so good, well structured. I have to see. This is what he said in that precious volume. You can't yet buy, because we made a mistake, and we publish it later on in September. We have the good ones. Short quote, so you have read it, of course. You see that he made a correlation between the inner commitments you make and the 10 glorious virtues, the paramitas, the character building ways of build to elevate your character. And you see, he talks about 10. And you say, we want to have 7, why 10? And I try to explain that to you, for it's not useless to look at 7 and 10 at the same time. You see them here. Those are given by Blavatsky in The Voice of the Silence. And Suzuki, you heard yesterday of him, told to his wife that The Voice of the Silence, that small booklet, gave the heart of Mahayana Buddhism, and that means that her work is recognized by Buddhists worldwide, and we have to explain the Sanskrit names, and I try to do that, but is it too small to read? Please tell me. You can read? Okay. You see, if you start under Dhyana, Blavatsky gives the key of charity and love immortal. And the verbal root da, to give, to sacrifice oneself, that's something else than to giving money to the Red Cross, as Dhyana is often explained in Esoteric Buddhism. You see charity, and that's something nice, but love immortal is in fact what is important, because he shows, and Blavatsky shows, that love immortal you only can have for the immortal part of your fellow man with the immortal part within yourself. So to practice Dhyana, you must have mastered the teachings of reincarnation. You must have discovered within yourself that part of yourself that doesn't die at all. The learning part that incarnates and incarnates and incarnates, and every time learns more and more of the wisdom of the universe. That is the only part of us able to practice love immortal and not love sentimental. That is the personality part. That is the sentimental love. But to practice the key of charity and love immortal, you have to know what reincarnation is, and you have to know the difference between your body and your reincarnating part. You see how it correlates, and I give only one example, no two, and not more, otherwise we don't have something to discuss on Sunday morning. So I wanted to show you that he doesn't only give the 7 Paramitas, but he gives them in their compassionate aspect. Who of you ever Googled the Paramitas? And you find many, many, many sites of Buddhist institutions explaining them. And what I always find lacking is the benadrukking, the emphasizing of the compassionate part of it. It's not only a way to behave, it is a means to become compassionate, and that is important. And he did that, and I give you one example, and that is Dhyana. I did that on purpose because Dhyana is so popular. Dhyana means contemplation. You see it, to contemplate, to sink into meditation. So, what does he say? He quotes, no, the next one. He quotes in his little booklet, and that's more to read, but I couldn't shorten it. Then I would have destructed what he wants to say. your own volume 1.
Who is he quoting?
One of the Buddhist sutras.
Yeah.
Yes?
To be clear, this is from a Buddhist sutra.
Yes, he's quoting. Yes? And I must say, he has chosen his sutra well. Yes. What I like to explain you, this, what you read, is the normal technical explanation of Dhyana. Tranquilization, the samadhi, the aspiration, realization, and so on. Concentration of mind, all the technical parts. But then, this is the second part, and that is important for students of Theosophy and practices of Theosophy. This is really important. I hope you have read it at least partially. You see, I put it in 2 parts. Here you see the discovery when you really practice compassion and meditation, the discovery that suffering in itself is emptiness, is empty. And the emptiness of suffering, the Maya, you can realize, and when you look around you to all your fellow men who are suffering, you see that their suffering in fact is empty, is not existing relatively. And if you discover that, then you see that for them, and that's the objective idealism GDP teaches us, for them it is very real. It is a very real thing to suffer. And when you see that for people not knowing the emptiness of suffering, suffering is real, and you know that it is in fact something that has no value in itself, but you can grow out of your suffering, then you make a vow. And this is the most important thing. I don't tell so much about it, otherwise I will hinder Nicholas in his presentation. And you see how he gives the Paramitas, the virtues. And that's unique. I didn't find it so much on the internet, but perhaps I have to look better, and perhaps with his knowledge of Buddhist groups and branches, he can offer an explanation of the actual Buddhists today. This, what you see here, is how GDP gave us, through his immense knowledge of Tibetan Buddhism, the way to practice the 7 virtues. And please correlate them with your 7 principles and your 7 jewels. Okay. I have to come to the conclusion from his teachings. What did GDP do by giving out the teachings as he did? First of all, he gave us back our Atman. In the world of anatta, of no Atman, he gave us the nuances. He gave us the nuance in Atman. He told us that Atman is not non-existent, but is not always the same. Atman is also a growing thing, and above Atman you have more. And that gives us more information than any exoteric Christian or Buddhist or whatever religion can tell us. He gave us Atman again, some focus within ourselves to look for our inner divine parts. And GDP gave us our physical body again. And how did he do that? What I explained about judge, what he said about seeing through the outer crust and seeing the inner life of your fellow man, he explained that further. Blavatsky starts in her famous article, Psychic and Noetic Action, she starts to learn people that there is something as the living background of our cells and our atoms, every building block of our human body has, as living beings, a background of consciousness. I don't know if I have to call it spiritual, we can call it a soul, yeah, not yet an awakened divine thing, but it is there. And Judge hinted on that the same, and GDP introduced the term life atom at a tremendously well way. You can learn so much about life atoms, the living entities expressing themselves as cells and molecules of our bodies. If you see that, then you know how to look at your body as a tremendous family of living beings. And then it isn't important if they incarnate within your outer crust or staying in the inner parts of ourselves as thoughts, as emotions or whatever. You learn that you are a host of a whole family of children, of living life atoms. And he gave those teachings very well in esoteric tradition in chapter 25 and 26. And I recommend you to download the original form from our website, because the book as it is now is translated into Dutch, the second edition, and I thought, hooray, we can use the translation and fill in the gaps. But there are no gaps. There are all holes, even within sentences. So we cannot use the Dutch translation to recognize the original one. So I recommend you take a course in English and read the downloaded original form of GDP himself, for he tells so much more about the life atoms. It's really dazzling what you see there to understand your relation with your life atoms, your thoughts, with every building block in your whole sevenfold composed being. That is what he does. But he does something I recognized only last year. We were at a Theosophical conference and we were invited to meditate upon the image of the Master. And at that same moment I thought, there's something not good. And I refused to meditate. I'm sorry, sometimes I'm not so nice, and I say I don't do that, because Patanjali and really all United Lodge members have studied Patanjali so well and thoroughly. Patanjali tells us you become what you are aiming for in your thought. And if you want to become compassion, living compassion, you become that. If you become, if you concentrate on something else, you will become that. And GDP gives us the soul part, the vehicle part, and the ego part. And if you look well, you can discover that when you concentrate on the image of the master, you are concentrating on the vehicle part. For an image is an image, that isn't the master. That's an image he uses to have communication with you in a visible way. But what is the master? The real master is the inner learning part. And that part of any human being is where you have to concentrate on. If you want to meditate on the masters, do it on their character. Do it on their Buddhic greatness, but not on their image. Even one of the members there said with a very well-meant desire, oh, what I would like to do in my life is for one time seeing the master. And that is the same image seeking. That is the soul part, even of Buddhas, even of whatever. You are concentrating on the outer part, and that is nothing. If you concentrate on the inner part, and I can give you one example. William Hartley once said to his students, if you have a problem in life, you can solve it in many ways. But if you want to solve it very well, think about how would a master be in that situation. Not act, but be in a situation like that. How would the character structure, how would the whole inner attitude of a master be in that situation? And when you have found that, then act from that knowing, from that insight. And it has no use at all to concentrate then on the image of the master. And I hope I haven't criticized other people. I don't want that. They were very honest. There was much integrity. But we learn from GDP that when you concentrate on the character side, on the ego side, and even on the Atmic side, then you grow in a line of compassionate fitness to do our job. Yes, it's not English what I say, but I hope you understand me. Okay. That is what he told us. And that is what he really gave us. He gave us the protection against formalism. He gave us the protection against only following the rules. Like Confucius instead of Lao Tse. Don't follow those rules blindly, but try to think out what they mean, and that makes you another person. I think I have only 2. Yes. The question is, what are we going to do with it? We are students of Gottfried de Purucker, of course of H.P. Blavatsky, and of course of the Lodge of Compassion. But when you try to revive what he said and what he gave, then this is what he said to his esoteric students. And I hope you feel at least gebonden, linked to his work, to feel it yourself. This is what he gave us. He talks about the left and the right side of the egg-shaped diagram. So, and this is what I wanted to give you as a start of our Sunday morning discussion with each other.
Could we ask questions?
Yes, of course.
Well, it's such a long...
Oh, wait.
It's such a marvelous view you've given. And I assume that that diagram that you showed there, the egg, the golden egg, was that in volume 9? I mean, chapter 9 of that? What volume is it?
It is in the fundamentals. It is in volume 9 of the 12 volumes of esoteric teachings of GDP.
I thought maybe you had devised it yourself from that, but I like the way you show the highest self reachable, being up there on those in the archetypal world with Paramatman. That's a marvelous thing to think of the human being linked in that way with that line you so ably discussed.
That is what I forget to give you. I have talked about 7 the whole morning, and in fact every time GP says 7, he also says 10 in the same sentence. But this is the explanation why he did that. You see, 7 is the fundamental number of the manifested universe, and 7 is what we can reach as a human being. But above the 7 there are 3 more. And those 3 more we can say that they exist, but it's very difficult to talk about because we have to outgrow our human faculties into other faculties. And if there is someone here able to talk about the 3 highest, I really want to hear it. Yes? Yes. So, in fact, it's 10, but when we take 7, we have a good, solid basis to reach out to non-theosophists and to inspire their heart and mind. You wanted to ask them?
I can say it's probably more, in fact, 12. GDP says many times 7 or 10 or 12, and it's the higher 5 Alrupa globes in our chain. What the next 2 Paramitas are, it's never said. Maybe it's because of the confusion of which the 7 Paramitas are. It's many, many places it's said differently.
I placed them in gray.
I saw that.
And GDP talks about them as new things, but he says they resemble them. And if you study them, you see that they are accents of the higher 3. And if you see that, then you're not discouraged, for you implement them as one, and as soon as you understand more, then you take the others with it.
Right. Then I wanted to say something. I'm not a member of ULT, but in defense of the ULT practice, the suggestion that you place the image of the Master in your heart was indeed made by KH. I agree with you, however, that it's a silly thing to do, but you'll have to take up the argument with KH.
It was explained to us as placing the image of the Master in your heart chakra.
Yes.
And that's not our heart.
I understand, but that's what KH said to do. I'll talk more on Saturday.
But he talked about the heart.
Yes.
And our heart is much more than the heart chakra.
I totally agree with you.
Yes. you see, and it wasn't ULT. We were not in the ULT conference. And it doesn't matter where we were.
Yes, right.
Yes?
Yes, I agree with you. I agree with you totally. I just think that was a suggestion from KH. However, I'll talk on Saturday.
And that is why GDP gave us the 2 lines, so that you can make the difference, you can discern the difference between the character building and the vehicles. Never concentrate on vehicles. Yes?
Yeah, this information is very interesting. I've read other charts that are similar, but not with this much detail. Some information to kind of share and then ask as well. As I've read a book by Paramahansa Yogananda. He has an institute in San Diego. And it was Dr. Bosey in his book, or one of these scientists took an electron micron microscope, or the equivalent of, and they put different words on. When the viewer viewed the field of energy, which is just a pure two spinning fields. Spin one way was proton, the spin the other way was an electron. And so they were that detailed in the atomic field. And when they put the word H-A-T-E, like hate, up there, when they saw and looked at those fields of spinning energy, they slowed down, they turned gray and dark. When they put words like love or gratitude or appreciation or yes to God or something positive, it turned to a higher spin and it turned rose color like love. And they worked with every symbol they could find. They found no higher spin or love than the Christian cross, representing the body of the Christ, which I thought was interesting. To then, if you have this thing called a desire body, and you just look at the cross, whether we get a feeling or not, somehow we are touching God's love through Christ, is what this experiment was showing, that guides us to evolve and make progress rather than fall back to beast or the gorilla kingdom, so to speak, which I thought was fascinating. Another one that came, and I don't know what this author says.
Can I answer on this? Otherwise you tell too much and
okay.
We have to follow you.
Okay.
There's one very interesting remark of a conversation between H.P. Blavatsky and her students William Quan Judge. Conversations on Occultism, it's called, in the books. And she answered his questions about elementals. And he said, I want to know more about elementals. And she said, I teach you that. And she said, take, wat is een cijfer? A number in your head, yes? Concentrate on a number. And then she asked some elemental, what is the number? And that was 1, 2, 3, 4. And hooray, it was correct. And Judge wanted to do that again. And again, the elemental world reacted exactly as what he thought. And then Blavatsky said, don't be boring, because you already know that whatever you think is reflected in the elemental world. So whatever a word you give to some elementals, they always will react as you are thinking. And if you are thinking compassionate, then the color will change. That's not a word. That is your life energy that makes that happen. So you can give the word hate and think very positive, and it will be rosy, yes, or whatever color it will be. Yes, it's what the elementals reflect from our inner situation. That's always, the Romans did that with birds and with whatever, and tea leaves is, but that is the same. It's the same principle, only another instrument. Yes, but it is normal. The way you look at life and the way you think is reflected in the elemental world. No questions at all? We go to... Okay.